Very few names resonate with the world like Martin Luther King Jr. His practice of nonviolence resistance has been studied and revered for decades. But did you know that Martin was not his birth name? Here are 15 things you didn't know about the great Dr. Martin Luther King. 15. He paid for Julia Roberts' birth. Julia Roberts, an award-winning actress for her roles in Hook, Ocean's 11, and Erin Brockovich. But her career may not have happened if it wasn't for Dr. King. Dr. King and his wife, the incredible Coretta Scott King, wanted to put their young children into acting classes. However, in the Jim Crow South, the options were limited. However, there was one school. The Kings found the only integrated theater school in Atlanta, the Actors and Writers Workshop. The school's owners were Walter and Betty Roberts. At their school, white and black children worked together and learned together. Because of the generosity of the Roberts, they befriended the Kings. During that time, Betty Roberts gave birth to a baby girl, Julia. But because of limited financial resources, the Roberts struggled to afford the subsequent hospital bills. But just like the Roberts extended their resources and kindness, the Kings returned the favor and paid the hospital bill. We think Dr. King and Mrs. King should get credits in every Julia Roberts movie. 14. A generational pastor. What do Martin Luther King Jr. and award-winning actress Angelica Houston have in common? No, he didn't pay for her birth. They both are third generations of their family's profession. Just like his father and grandfather, Dr. King went on to become a pastor. Dr. King was a fierce advocate of nonviolent disruption, and his courage came from his deep-rooted faith in Christianity. As a child, he got to see his grandfather, Adam Williams, and father, Martin Luther King Sr., lead the Ebenezer Baptist Church. Growing up, Martin Jr. grappled with the idea of Christianity, often questioning whether the religion was right for him. However, he still attended faithfully and sang in the choir. In college, he continued to study theology and worked as an assistant minister. Then, at the age of only 25, he was called to be a pastor at the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Mobile, Alabama. From the pulpit is where Dr. King started to gain fame as a powerful orator, as the Dexter Church was a very influential church in the black community of Mobile. 13. He was into fashion. When you talk about Dr. King, it's usually in the realm of fighting for equality and going up against white supremacy. It's sometimes easy to forget he was a regular guy, and he wasn't immune to looking in the mirror every day. Dr. King loved dressing nice. No matter if it's him at the front of the pulpit, leading hundreds of protesters, or casually kicking it around the neighborhood, you'd never catch his choice of clothing lacking. His knack for looking sharp started young. While in school, he was known for keeping his patent leather shoes polished and rocking tweed shoes. So much so, his nickname was Tweety. His smooth style made him a favorite among all of his classmates. As he got older, his staple choice was a three-piece suit, white formal dress shirt, French cuffs, and black Oxfords. But it was his laid-back choices that surprised those looking through the archives. Straw hats, Hawaiian shirts, Ray-Ban glasses, suede double-breasted jackets, and a Rolex were all pieces from Closet de King. 12. A child genius. As impressive as Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. the man was, him as a child was equally impressive. Before he was leading thousands on the streets, he was a leader in his classroom. Dr. King showed his genius early when he skipped 9th grade. He then furthered his legend when he graduated high school at only 15 years old. But as many children, young Martin at times showed disdain for school. Young Martin would often get into fights, and he hated grammar and spelling. But he persisted. Dr. King garnered his vast vocabulary from reading the entire dictionary and would often get out of altercations by using his words. As a child, he also excelled as a member of the junior choir and took violin and piano lessons. 11. Almost 1,000 streets are named after him. There was a time where black and white people couldn't even share the same sidewalk, so this next fact about Dr. King is actually insane. As of 2023, there are 955 streets named after Martin Luther King Jr. In just about every major city, you can find an MLK Boulevard, street, avenue, ways, lanes, and courts. In Georgia alone, there are over 125 streets bearing the civil rights activist's name. Of course, this is far from what Dr. King or any other person during his time could have imagined. Not only are roadways bearing his name, but schools scattered throughout the country also feature his name. Over 114 public schools in America carry in the legacy of Dr. King. In a country that separated everything from schools, restaurants, to water fountains by race, to now have places of community and education be labeled with the name of a black man is the progress Dr. King dreamed of. 10. He survived an assassination attempt. Tragically, Dr. King's life was taken away before his 40th birthday, while standing on the balcony of a hotel in Memphis, Tennessee. However, that wasn't the first attempt on his life. September 20th, 1958, Dr. King was at the Blumstein's department store in Harlem, New York. At the time, he was on tour promoting his book, Stride Toward Freedom. In the midst of signing books, a 42-year-old black woman named Izola Curry approached Dr. King. "Are you Martin Luther King?" Izola asked, and as Dr. King confirmed his identity, in an act of insanity, Izola reached in her purse and retrieved a letter opener and put it through Dr. King's chest, at the edge of his heart. Miss Curry was immediately apprehended. Dr. King immediately rushed to the hospital. The sharp blade was inches away from one of his aorta. Doctors told him he was so close to death that a sneeze would have caused the blade to puncture his aorta, which would have resulted in him suffocating in his own blood. As for Izola Curry, she was diagnosed with schizophrenia and found to have been suffering from extreme bouts of delusions and paranoia. She was found unfit for trial and sentenced to several years in a psychiatric ward. 9. Father of 4 children. Martin Luther King Jr. was a lot of things to a lot of people, but nothing came before his wife and children. On June 18, 1953, Martin married Coretta Scott. They went on to have 4 children, Yolanda, Martin III, Dexter, and Bernice. Dr. King's devotion to the fight for equality kept him on the road and away from his family for weeks at a time, and many months throughout the year, but they never left his mind. When Dr. King delivered his famous "I Have a Dream" speech, he highlighted how his vision for the future centered around them. "I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character." Dr. King knew he was important to thousands, but he knew who was the real backbone of his strength, and that was his wife, Coretta Scott King. To have a wife like Coretta, who was strong enough to take on 4 children, and the constant threat of danger pointed at her husband, was something Dr. King deemed invaluable. 8. The youngest Nobel Peace Prize winner. Martin Luther King Jr. died at 39 years old. One of the most fascinating parts of the life and legacy of Dr. King is that he accomplished so many great things in such a short life. In 1964, Dr. King was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for his leadership in the nonviolent struggle for the civil rights of African Americans. At the time, he was not only the 12th American to win, but at 35, he was also the youngest. Another fact about his victory, Dr. King found out he won the prestigious award in the hospital. Earlier that day, Dr. King had checked himself into the hospital because of exhaustion. Dr. King was not the first African American to win the award. That title belongs to one of the greatest American Renaissance men, Ralph Bunche. In total, only 3 African Americans have won the Nobel Peace Prize: Ralph Bunche, Dr. King, and the first black president of the United States, Barack Obama. 7. Protested for 13 months. Historically, American demonstrations and protests have proven to be chaotic and destructive in order to bring about change. However, a lot of these fiery protests burn hot, but not long. So that's why this next feat by Dr. King was so remarkable. On December 1st, 1955, a young black woman named Rosa Parks was arrested for her refusal to obey a Jim Crow segregation law that prohibits black people from sitting in the front of public buses. Her resistance and subsequent arrest triggered the Montgomery bus boycott. A 26-year-old newly ordained pastor from Atlanta was chosen to guide the protest, none other than Martin Luther King Jr. At the helm, MLK led acts of civil disobedience, grassroots organization, and nonviolent protests. These acts of peaceful resistance lasted for 385 days. Their discipline, dedication, and patience paid off in the end. The results? A Supreme Court decision ordering buses to integrate. 6. Arrested over 25 times. You might think because Dr. King's protests were nonviolent and peaceful that he wouldn't be considered a troublemaker, but his arrest record says otherwise. Martin Luther King Jr. was arrested at least 30 times. Even though his tactics were peaceful in performance, they were annoying to those who opposed them. His leading demonstrations of civil disobedience, like sit-ins, landed him in prison for trespassing. His other crimes include marching without a permit, disturbing the peace, and breaking various protest laws. Even as America continuously tried to dim his light, he constantly rose above it. After being arrested again on April 16, 1963, from a prison cell in Birmingham, Alabama, Dr. King penned his famous Letter from Birmingham Jail. Dr. King wrote the letter as a response to 8 white clergymen who agreed that social injustices along racial lines existed, but called for an end to the acts of civil disobediences. In the open letter, He wrote that people have a moral responsibility to break unjust laws and to take direct action, rather than waiting potentially forever for justice to come through the courts. In the letter, he continues, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." We are halfway through our list. Hit that subscribe button if you're still there. These next few facts are sure to surprise many. 5. Met Malcolm X only once. Whether it's LeBron versus Jordan, Michael and Prince, or Pacino and De Niro, we are often divided on who is the best. That was also the case when it came to the civil rights movement and the correct way forward for African Americans. And the topics of the debate, the combating philosophies of MLK versus those of Malcolm X. Malcolm X and Dr. King were a dividing line for a lot of African Americans, supporters, and critics. Dr. King, with his philosophies of nonviolence, creating changes through legislation, and push for integration, versus Malcolm's fiery rhetoric, calling for African Americans to defend themselves against white violence and black separatism instead of integration. A lot of the divisiveness was infused by the FBI and CIA, whose main goals were to dismantle both parties in their efforts to put a halt to the civil rights movement. Much of this was able to persist for some time because the two giants only met once. The chance meeting took place on March 25, 1964, in the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. The men were both in attendance, watching a Senate hearing regarding legislation aimed at ending segregation in public places and racial discrimination in employment. The bill had been proposed by President John F. Kennedy, following intense lobbying by King and others, and was being shepherded through Congress by President Lyndon Johnson. After Dr. King finished a press conference, the former member of the Nation of Islam approached Dr. King. The interaction lasted mere minutes. Unfortunately, that would be the only time these brilliant leaders met, as Malcolm X was assassinated a year later. 4. His whole neighborhood is preserved. Did you know that Martin Luther King Jr.'s entire childhood neighborhood is preserved? Dr. King was raised in the Sweet Auburn neighborhood of Atlanta, Georgia. Sweet Auburn was a predominantly black neighborhood and considered a hub of black commerce and culture. The Kings lived in a two-story frame Queen Anne-style house that was purchased in 1909 by Dr. King's grandfather, Reverend Adam Daniel Williams. After Reverend Williams' death, the house was passed down to his daughter and her husband, Dr. King's parents. They lived in the home until Dr. King was 12 years old. The Sweet Auburn neighborhood consisted of black doctors, black lawyers, teachers, and working class folk. Most of the original homes, including the historic shotgun homes, have been preserved. Some are even occupied by new residents. Now, the entire neighborhood is part of the Martin Luther King Jr. National Historic Park, a sprawling 35-acre exhibit that lets you tour the roots of the civil rights advocate. The national park also includes a museum, an educational center, and the Ebenezer Baptist Church. 3. He's buried at a museum. The world mourned on April 4, 1968. That is the day Dr. King was assassinated while standing on the balcony of Lorraine Hotel in Memphis, Tennessee. But do you know where he is buried? A public ceremony was held the very next day in Memphis, where an estimated 200,000 watched as his funeral procession passed through the streets. His body was then flown home to Atlanta, where hundreds of thousands mourned. A public viewing was held at Ebenezer Baptist Church, and he was eventually laid to rest in Southview Cemetery next to his parents. However, 2 years later, his body was moved to what is now the Martin Luther King Jr. National Historic Park. The marble tomb sits in the middle of the reflecting pool that highlights the outer area of the museum aspect of the national park. The burial site initially only had space for Dr. King, but in 2006, shortly after her death, his wife, Mrs. Coretta Scott King, was placed next to him. Two of the most iconic and powerful people in the civil rights movement now rest together in eternal grace. 2. His birth name is Michael. Some of the greatest forces in modern times have been named Michael. Michael Jordan, Michael Jackson, and Michael King Jr. Yep, Dr. King's birth name wasn't Martin, but Michael. He was named after his father, Michael King Sr. In 1934, the Ebenezer Baptist Church sent Michael Sr. on a multinational trip that included a stop in Berlin, Germany. While there, he visited sites in Germany that were associated with the Reformation leader Martin Luther. Martin Luther was a German priest during the 1500s. He taught that salvation and, consequently, eternal life were not earned by good deeds. Rather, they are received only as a free gift of God's grace through the believer's faith in Jesus Christ, who is the sole redeemer from sin. King Sr. was so moved by the works associated with the German priest that upon his return home, he changed his name to Martin Luther King Sr. and his 5-year-old son's name to Martin Luther King Jr. Even though born a century apart, both the Reformation leader and civil rights leader shared more in common than just a name. They both were frustrated with the hypocrisy of the power structures that guided their country. Luther with the church, King with the system of racial segregation. They both were great writers and communicators, and they both created movements that outlived them both. Do you know any other crazy facts about Dr. King? Comment below. 1. I Have a Dream was improvised. Move over, Jay-Z. One of the greatest on a mic also could make it happen without a pen. Did you know that Dr. King's famed I Have a Dream speech was a freestyle? On August 28, 1963, more than 250,000 people gathered for this historic march on Washington. The march was a result of the growing frustration with racial segregation and continued systemic oppression. The gathering of over 260,000 was a resounding demand for justice for African Americans. The last speaker at the event was Dr. Martin Luther King. Broadcasted on live television, Dr. King began his closing arguments by invoking the Declaration of Independence, the Emancipation Proclamation, and the U.S. Constitution. But then he spoke from his soul. I have a dream. His voice trembled, and his words sent the thunder through the crowd. Dr. King spoke of a nation that would judge each other by the content of our character and not the color of our skin. That the sons of former slaves and former slave owners would sit down in brotherhood. In his dream, the heat of oppression would transform into an oasis of justice and freedom. Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech is ranked as the greatest speech of the 20th century. His words took root and helped lead to the Civil Rights Act the following year. Dr. King's work that day, and all of his others, continue to impact us to this day. May his dream continue to inspire us all.
On August 28, 1963, Martin Luther King Jr. delivered an address that has since become a timeless symbol of hope and equality.
I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day
The I Have a Dream speech was witnessed by 250,000 people in attendance on that historic day. Millions more watched on TV and listened through their radios as MLK delivered his powerful message from the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. Yet, despite its monumental impact, this iconic speech is often surrounded by myths and misconceptions. In today's video, we will uncover some of these misconceptions and strive to present the true version of this historic moment. Let's begin with Number 7, MLK did not lead the protest. Millions around the world wrongly believe that the 250,000 people jammed into the National Mall that day just to listen to Martin Luther King and that he was the one spearheading the protest. In fact, the protest was called the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, and King was just one of several march leaders. The march was a collaborative effort among what we now call the Big Six of the Civil Rights Movement. They were Philip Randolph, James Farmer, John Lewis, Roy Wilkins, Whitney Young, and Martin Luther King Jr., while the architect of the event was activist Bayard Rustin. Eric Arneson, a George Washington University civil rights movement historian, put it this way: it was King's dream, not his march. Number 6, MLK wasn't the only speaker. Since it wasn't King's march, it is no surprise that he wasn't the only speaker that day. Given the fanfare around that address, many wrongly believed that Martin Luther King Jr. was the only one who took the podium. In reality, he was one in a lineup of 10 and was slotted in as the last speaker. While he wasn't the only speaker, it's true that his address was the main attraction. The only reason he was slotted in last was out of concern that people may leave after he finished speaking. Another interesting fact is that Dr. King, like all other speakers, was only supposed to speak for 4 minutes. However, his iconic speech went on for 16 minutes, going down as arguably the greatest address in history. Fun fact, there was a white speaker. The most prominent white speaker was called the White Martin Luther King. Walter Reuther was the head of the United Automobile Workers, which provided office space, staff, and funding for the March in Detroit and the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. He was the 7th speaker listed on the program and shared his remarks to the crowd. We will not solve education or housing or public accommodations as long as millions of Negroes are treated as second-class economic citizens and denied jobs, declared Walter Reuther, the legendary president of the United Auto Workers. This rally is not the end, It's the beginning of a great moral crusade to arouse America to the unfinished work of American democracy. Thus did he confidently link the goals of organized labor to those of the Black freedom struggle. In 1998, Time magazine included him in its list of builders and titans of the 20th century. Irving Bluestone, Reuther's former administrative assistant, shared this popular story to explain who Reuther was at the March on Washington. Standing close to the podium were two elderly women. As Reuther was introduced, one of the women was overheard asking her friend, "Who is Walter Reuther?" The response, "Walter Reuther, he's the white Martin Luther King." Number 5, not the first time he spoke of his dream. August 28 was the day that MLK's dream was immortalized. However, contrary to popular belief, it was far from the first time he uttered the words, "I have a dream." King in his immediate circles was known to employ the phrase time and again. He had used it just a week earlier in Chicago, just 2 months earlier at a rally in Detroit, and a dozen other times in the preceding year. The previous addresses where MLK had employed the dream phrase had been well received, but none of those were elevated to a legendary status. That is probably why some of King's close allies didn't want him to use the same speech again. Which brings me to number 4, I have a dream almost didn't happen. The day before his speech, Dr. King had brought up the dream to his advisor, Reverend Wyatt T. Walker, who called it hackneyed and trite. So it is believed that when Martin Luther King Jr. took the podium, the text in his hand did not contain the words, "I have a dream." The actual draft had the working title, "Normalcy Never Again," and steered clear of any references to King's dreams. For the first 10 minutes of his address, King mostly stuck to the agreed-upon draft, which had some great points and was embellished by MLK's oratory. However, his words were far from historic yet. At this point, King decided to go off script. There are different versions of why he chose to go off script. According to King's friend and draft speechwriter, Clarence B. Jones, that part was prompted by MLK's favorite gospel singer Mahalia Jackson, who was also on the platform. During one pause in the speech, Jackson shouted to him, "Tell them about the dream, Martin, tell them about the dream," and the rest is history. 3 months later, King himself addressed his decision to go off script. "I started out reading the speech, just all of a sudden. The audience response was wonderful that day, and all of a sudden this thing came to me that I'd used it many times before, the thing about I have a dream, and I just felt that I wanted to use it here." That part had become Dr. King's signature style. But did you know that the original speech was not entirely written by the man himself? Number 3, who wrote the speech? The original speech had been in the works for weeks, and MLK had drafted it with the assistance of Stanley Levison and Clarence B. Jones in Riverdale, New York City. Jones later wrote that due to the burdensome nature of preparations for the march, the speech was not a priority. On the night before the march, King took the draft with him to his room to practice. According to some historians, that is also when King practiced the part about his dream. However, there are others who believe that it was completely improvised on the spot. Some parts of the I Have a Dream section were also inspired by addresses from the past. One famous passage about letting the freedom ring from mountains across the country was from a 1952 speech by Reverend Archibald Carey. Fun fact, the King family still owns the I Have a Dream speech. Though it is one of the most famous and widely celebrated speeches in U.S. history, the I Have a Dream speech is not in the public domain, but is protected by copyright, which is owned and enforced by King's heirs. As reported in the Washington Post, King himself obtained the rights a month after he gave the speech, when he sued 2 companies selling unauthorized copies. Though some parts of the speech may be used lawfully without approval, for example, individual teachers have been able to use the speech in their classrooms, the King estate requires anyone who wants to air the speech to pay for that right. Number 2, the speech wasn't universally appreciated. In the immediate aftermath of the event, observers lauded MLK's speech as the high point of the March on Washington. Millions today understandably believe that the speech instantly achieved legendary status. However, it must be said that not everyone was a fan. There were several critics, not least the legendary black nationalist Malcolm X himself. X scathingly described the march as a picnic and a circus. He went on to write an even more ruthless review. Whoever heard of angry revolutionists swinging their bare feet together with their oppressor in lily pad park pools, with gospels and guitars and I Have a Dream speeches, all while the black masses in America were, and still are, having a nightmare. It is well documented that the speech and MLK's popularity soon began to erode. Number 1. The speech disappeared from public memory. One popular take away from the civil rights movement and the "I Have a Dream" speech is that it firmly established King as an undisputed hero. The reality is a bit different. In the months following his address, King's image changed drastically. He began an unsuccessful campaign to desegregate urban ghettos in the North. He also came out against the Vietnam War and lost powerful allies in the White House. This was followed by race riots from Los Angeles to Newark, and King's nonviolent tactics were considered out of date. In 1965, King lamented to an audience in Chicago, "I have had to watch my dream transform into a nightmare." Martin Luther King Jr. was even denounced as an extremist, and his iconic words were beginning to fade away. According to William P. Jones, author of The March on Washington, in 65 or 66, most people would not have said it was the most powerful speech ever. For many historians, it was King's murder that forced the world to rediscover the worth of that speech, rescuing it from oblivion. Today, a vast majority of Americans and history enthusiasts worldwide see Martin Luther King's speech as a watershed moment in the civil rights movement. In significance, it is considered on par with the Gettysburg Address or the Declaration of Independence. However, there is still a lot that we get wrong about that day and that address.
Do you believe Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. were truly enemies? Were their philosophies irreconcilable? Or were they in fact two sides of the same coin fighting for the same goal, racial equality, just with different weapons? Join us on this journey as we delve into the complex relationship between these two iconic figures. Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. were the giants of the civil rights movement, yet their names are often uttered in hushed whispers, separated by an invisible line in history. America in the 1950s and 60s was a tinderbox of racial tension. Segregation and discrimination were the law of the land, casting a long shadow over the lives of millions of African Americans. It was in this cauldron of injustice that two voices rose above the din, each offering a different path toward freedom. Martin Luther King Jr., the apostle of nonviolent resistance, with a soaring dream of racial harmony, and Malcolm X, the fiery revolutionary, preached self-defense and black self-reliance. Let's explore their contrasting philosophies, the role of the media in creating a false dichotomy, and the enduring impact of their legacies on the struggle for racial justice today. The Civil Rights Movement, 1950s through the 1960s. To fully understand the relationship between Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr., we must first step back and go through the canvas of America in the 1950s and 60s. It was a nation grappling with the deep scars of slavery and the lingering injustices that festered in its wake. Imagine a world where black and white weren't just colors, but dividing lines etched into every aspect of life. Segregation ruled with an iron fist, dictating where you could live, learn, eat, even drink. Public buses, schools, restaurants, and even water fountains were segregated, forcing African Americans into a shadow society and denying them the basic dignities and rights afforded to their white counterparts. This wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a denial of humanity. Black families were trapped in cycles of poverty, denied access to quality education and employment, and subjected to the constant threat of violence and intimidation. Jim Crow laws were the teeth of this oppressive system, while the brutal realities of lynchings and police brutality was its ugly claw. The Civil Rights Movement, like a tidal wave of human dignity, began to gather momentum. From the Montgomery bus boycott, led by Rosa Parks and Dr. King, to the sit-ins at lunch counters and the freedom rides challenging interstate segregation, the movement refused to be silenced. It was a chorus of voices, demanding equality, justice, and an end to the suffocating grip of Jim Crow. This was the stage upon which Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. emerged. Two towering figures, each with a unique vision for achieving the same dream, a dream of a truly free and equal America for all its citizens. But the paths they would choose, the tools they would use, and the shadows that the media would cast upon their relationship would become a story in itself. Different paths, but the same goal. Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. represented two distinct but equally valid approaches to the same goal. Malcolm X championed self-defense and black reliance, while Martin Luther King Jr. advocated for nonviolent resistance and integration. Their voices, forever etched in history, continue to inspire and challenge us, reminding us that the fight for justice and equality is an ongoing journey, paved with both fiery defiance and an unwavering hope. Malcolm X, Malcolm X's life was a testament to the harsh realities of segregation and its brutal effects. Born Malcolm Little in Omaha, Nebraska in 1925, he witnessed firsthand the racism that poisoned American society. Tragedy struck with the death of his father, leaving the family to grapple with poverty and discrimination. Malcolm's early experiences, fraught with adversity, would shape a worldview steeped in resilience, self-reliance, and an unyielding quest for justice. Malcolm's journey took a profound turn during his incarceration when he discovered the teachings of the Nation of Islam. Embracing Islam, he shed his surname Little, symbolizing the rejection of his family's legacy of enslavement. Expelled from school at 15, he faced poverty, discrimination, and even prison, where he encountered the Nation of Islam, also known as NOI. The NOI's message of black self-determination and self-defense resonated deeply with Malcolm, offering an alternative to the oppressive status quo. His association with the Nation of Islam, led by Elijah Muhammad, catapulted him into a prominent role. His articulate speeches and commitment to the tenets of the Nation of Islam made him a rising star within the movement. Malcolm X became a powerful voice for the NOI, preaching black pride and self-reliance. He advocated for self-defense against white aggression, famously stating, "We have no program for integration, assimilation, or separation. We have a program of self-determination." His message of Pan-Africanism, promoting unity among black people worldwide, resonated with many disillusioned by the slow pace of change in America. Malcolm X's advocacy extended beyond religious principles, embracing the Nation of Islam's philosophy of black separatism. He championed economic self-sufficiency and community empowerment. Malcolm X's fiery speeches challenged America's conscience, demanding freedom and equality, not through pleas for integration, but through any means necessary. In the face of escalating racial violence, Malcolm took a controversial stance on self-defense, arguing that African Americans had the right to protect themselves from systematic oppression. His powerful address at the 1964 Organization of Afro-American Unity Summit in Cairo, OAU, advocating for armed self-defense and Pan-African solidarity, stands as a testament to his unwavering commitment to black liberation. As Malcolm X rose to prominence, the media played a pivotal role in shaping public perception. Initial portrayals often focused on his fiery rhetoric and confrontational style, painting him as a radical figure challenging the status quo. Martin Luther King Jr. Born on January 15, 1929, in the heart of the American South, Atlanta, Georgia, Martin Luther King Jr. emerged from a lineage deeply entrenched in the African American church tradition. Raised in a segregated society, young Martin experienced the harsh realities of racial discrimination from an early age. His parents instilled in him the values of resilience and determination, fostering a sense of purpose that would later shape his destiny. King's educational journey in racial segregated schools exposed him to the stark inequalities of the Jim Crow South, fueling his desire for change. His formative years laid the groundwork for a future leader who would champion civil rights with unparalleled conviction. The spark that ignited King's leadership came during the Montgomery bus boycott in 1955. His involvement in the protest against racial segregation on public transportation catapulted him into the forefront of the civil rights movement. In the aftermath of his pivotal event, King played a key role in founding the Southern Christian Leadership Conference in 1957. At the helm of the SCLC, King led the charge for civil rights through nonviolent means, drawing inspiration from Mahatma Gandhi's philosophy. His charisma and eloquence made him a powerful force for change, capturing the hearts and minds of a nation yearning for justice. Dr. King's commitment to nonviolent resistance became the cornerstone of his activism. Infused with Christian teachings of love and forgiveness, he orchestrated a series of peaceful protests, marches, and acts of civil disobedience to challenge racial injustice. His strategy aimed not only at legislative change, but also at transforming the hearts and minds of the American people. Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech, delivered at the March on Washington in 1963, remains a beacon of hope and a defining moment in the civil rights movement. He spoke of a beloved community where race wouldn't divide, where justice would prevail, and where little black boys and little white boys would be able to join hands as brothers. His philosophy of nonviolence extended beyond mere tactics, urging love and forgiveness even in the face of hate and brutality. Dr. King's leadership in marches like the Selma to Montgomery March in 1965, where he faced tear gas and billy clubs, showcased his unwavering commitment to nonviolent protest. His powerful sermons and speeches like Letter from Birmingham Jail eloquently articulated the moral case for racial equality and challenged the conscience of a nation. As King's prominence grew, so did the media's attention. News outlets depicted him as a symbol of hope, a charismatic leader advocating for a more just society. However, the contrast between King's nonviolent approach and the more assertive stance of figures like Malcolm X led to nuanced portrayals. Media coverage ranged from admiration to criticism, reflecting the complexities of public perception during this tumultuous period. While Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. navigated different paths to achieve racial equality, one constant loomed in the shadows: the watchful eye of the FBI. Directed by J. Edgar Hoover. This omnipresent surveillance not only aimed to undermine their movements, but also fueled a climate of fear and mistrust that exacerbated tensions between the two leaders and their supporters. As voices advocating for justice and equality grew louder, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, under the leadership of J. Edgar Hoover, turned its watchful eye toward those at the forefront. Both Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. found themselves under intense FBI scrutiny. Wiretaps, infiltration, and the compilation of extensive dossiers became the tools of surveillance. The government, in its pursuit of control, sought to understand, monitor, and sometimes undermine the leaders who dared to challenge the status quo. The FBI viewed both Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. as threats to national security. Malcolm X's affiliation with the Nation of Islam and his calls for self-defense triggered alarms, leading to extensive monitoring of his movements and communications. Likewise, Dr. King's nonviolent protests, despite their peaceful nature, were seen as a potential catalyst for social unrest, prompting the FBI to infiltrate the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and engage in illegal wiretapping. FBI made blatant attempts to disrupt the movement. This surveillance went beyond mere observation. The infamous COINTELPRO, or counterintelligence program, emerged as a sinister weapon in the government's arsenal. Covert actions ranged from spreading false rumors to exacerbating existing tensions between activists. The goal was to create divisions, fuel internal conflicts, and ultimately weaken the collective strength of the civil rights movement. With a mandate to disrupt civil rights organizations, COINTELPRO targeted not only Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr., but also aimed to sow seeds of discord within the broader movement. The FBI actively sought to discredit both leaders. In Malcolm X's case, they leaked information to the media portraying him as a violent extremist. For Dr. King, the FBI sent him anonymous letters containing fabricated details about his personal life, aiming to sow dissension within the SCLC and damage his reputation. The orchestrated attempts to create rifts within the movement cast a shadow over the relationship between Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. The pervasive atmosphere of suspicion created by the FBI's actions played a significant role in amplifying existing tensions. Media often pitted the two against each other, highlighting their contrasting tactics and overlooking their shared goal of racial equality. This constant scrutiny and manufactured discord prevented genuine understanding and collaboration, ultimately weakening the collective force of the civil rights movement. As the 1960s unfolded, both Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. underwent profound transformations in their perspectives marked by personal growth, changing circumstances, and an ever-shifting socio-political landscape. Beneath the surface of contrasting tactics and public statements existed a layer of mutual respect and a shared yearning for a better future for Black Americans. Despite their divergent philosophies, Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. acknowledged and praised each other's contributions to the civil rights movement. Malcolm X referred to Dr. King as his brother in the fight, expressing admiration for his leadership and charisma. After parting ways with the Nation of Islam in 1964, Malcolm X embarked on a journey of ideological reevaluation. His pilgrimage to Mecca exposed him to a more inclusive Islam and a global perspective that transcended racial divides. Rejecting the separatist stance of his earlier years, Malcolm began advocating for a united front in the fight against racial injustice. His evolving perspective embraced collaboration with other civil rights leaders, signaling a departure from the strict doctrines of the Nation of Islam. In turn, while disagreeing with some of Malcolm X's views, King recognized his power to stir Black consciousness and ignite a spirit of defiance. Martin Luther King Jr.'s activism expanded beyond the boundaries of civil rights. King, a staunch advocate of nonviolence, grew increasingly critical of U.S. policies, notably the Vietnam War. Both leaders recognized that the struggle for civil rights extended beyond legal reforms. It encompassed dismantling systematic economic inequalities. Malcolm and King shared a vision of addressing poverty as an essential component of the broader fight for justice. These pronouncements, often overshadowed by heated rhetoric, illustrate the underlying respect each held for the other's unique contribution to the struggle. Contrary to popular perception, Malcolm X's fiery advocacy and Dr. King's nonviolent resistance weren't contradictory, but rather complementary forces pushing towards the same goal. Malcolm X's strong stance on self-defense resonated with those disillusioned with the slow pace of progress, while Dr. King's unwavering commitment to nonviolence garnered international support and exposed the brutality of segregation to the world. Each approach, catering to different segments of the Black community and generating pressure from different angles, served to advance the cause of racial equality, albeit in distinct ways. Both participated in the March on Washington in 1963, a monumental demonstration of unity against segregation. Additionally, Malcolm X expressed support for Dr. King's Voting Rights Act campaign, recognizing its potential to empower Black communities. These moments of shared purpose, though overshadowed by public disagreements, serve as reminders that their paths, while divergent, occasionally intersected in the fight for a common cause. While Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. navigated their paths toward racial equality, a sinister element slithered in the background: white supremacy. Fueled by hatred and fear, these organizations and individuals exploited the perceived divisions between the leaders, utilizing violence and manipulation to weaken the civil rights movement from within. White supremacist groups like the Ku Klux Klan and the John Birch Society saw the contrasting philosophies of Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. as an opportunity to sow discord. They amplified the media's portrayal of Malcolm X as a violent extremist, hoping to alienate moderate white allies and discredit the entire movement. Moreover, they portrayed Dr. King as a controllable moderate, hoping to lull the Black community into a false sense of progress while maintaining the white power structure. White supremacist groups weren't content with mere manipulation. They employed brutal tactics to silence Black leaders and intimidate their followers. Church bombings, targeted assassinations, and threats of violence were commonplace, creating an atmosphere of fear and uncertainty that hampered organizing efforts and stifled dissent. The brutal murders of Medgar Evers, Viola Liuzzo, and countless others stand as stark reminders of the lengths white supremacists were willing to go to maintain their grip on power. By portraying Malcolm X as a dangerous radical and Dr. King as a safe moderate, white supremacists benefited twofold. Malcolm X's fiery rhetoric, though powerful, could be easily dismissed as dangerous extremism, isolating him from mainstream support and weakening his influence. Meanwhile, Dr. King's nonviolent approach, while garnering international acclaim, could be contained and co-opted within the existing power structure, allowing white supremacists to maintain control over the pace and direction of change. The lives of Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. reached untimely and tragic ends, leaving an indelible mark on the pages of history. The promise of a brighter future was shattered on February 21, 1965, when Malcolm X was assassinated in New York City. His untimely death sent shockwaves through the civil rights movement, leaving a void that could never be filled. Just 3 years later, on April 4, 1968, the world mourned the loss of Martin Luther King Jr. as he fell victim to an assassin's bullet in Memphis, Tennessee. The dreamer who envisioned equality and justice for all was silenced. Malcolm X's death cast a sad light on the complexities of his journey, prompting a reevaluation of his legacy. Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination, occurring against a backdrop of civil unrest and a struggle for justice, added layers of poignancy to his already profound impact. The assassinations of Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. not only robbed the world of two influential leaders, but also profoundly impacted public perception and historical narratives. The assassinations of Malcolm X and Dr. King cast a long shadow of grief and doubt over the civil rights movement. While new leaders emerged to carry the torch, the movement undeniably changed course, grappling with internal divisions and searching for a new path forward. The brutal slayings of Malcolm X in 1965 and Martin Luther King Jr. in 1968 sent shockwaves through the civil rights movement and the nation as a whole. In the wake of these tragedies, the nonviolent resistance championed by Dr. King faced growing skepticism. Many within the Black community, disillusioned by the slow pace of progress and shaken by the brutal reality of violence, embraced Malcolm X's call for self-defense and Black self-reliance. This shift in sentiment led to the rise of Black power movements, advocating for armed self-defense and community empowerment. These weren't mere losses of iconic figures. They were brutal reminders of the deep-seated racial hatred that still festered within American society. The impact of their death resonates even today, shaping the trajectory of the movement and influencing the ongoing fight for racial justice. Their legacies don't exist in isolation. They continue to shape the conversation about race, justice, and social change. Leaders like Ella Baker, Fannie Lou Hamer, James Baldwin, and countless others, each with their unique experiences and philosophies, played crucial roles in shaping the movement's direction and impact. Ignoring their contributions is like viewing a masterpiece through a pinhole, missing the richness and depth of the entire work. From Black Lives Matter protests to debates over police reform, The voices of Malcolm X and Dr. King resonate through the decades, offering valuable perspectives and reminding us of the unfinished work of the civil rights movement. As we conclude on lives of Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr., it is crucial to reflect on the intricate dynamics that shaped their journey through the tumultuous waters of the civil rights movement. According to historian Robin D.G. Kelly, while often portrayed as rivals, Malcolm X and King were more allies on different battlefields. King's nonviolence shone a light on racial injustice on the global stage, while Malcolm's bold advocacy for black self-reliance empowered those yearning for immediate action. Both were vital forces, pushing the movement forward from different angles. Malcolm X's exposure to racism and incarceration fueled his belief in self-defense and black unity. King, influenced by Christian teachings and the Montgomery bus boycott, embraced nonviolence as a way to expose the moral bankruptcy of segregation. Though different paths, their shared goal was dismantling the machinery of racial oppression. The relationship between Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. was not a simplistic tale of adversaries. It was a nuanced narrative, marked by occasional convergence, yet defined by the diversity of their approaches to the fight for civil rights. As we conclude this journey, let us not only remember the legacies of Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr., it surely indicates a profound reflection on the societal forces that shaped and distorted their narratives. By understanding the intricacies of the past, we gain a clearer vision of the path forward, a path where the legacies of Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. can continue to guide us toward a more just and equitable world.
Throughout America's history, the achievements of African Americans have been reduced to non-important. However, the greatest American export to the world has continually been black culture. From the way music is composed, to how people dress down, to how people protest against oppression. No culture has impacted the world quite like black culture. Here are 15 black men who have changed history forever. We guarantee at least 5 people on our list have impacted your life. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. First up, we have the undisputed king of pop. 15. Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson was a global icon and pioneer in the world of music and entertainment. Born on August 29, 1958, in Gary, Indiana, Jackson rose to fame as the lead singer of the Jackson 5, a Motown group formed with the siblings. His solo career, which began in the 1970s, propelled him to unprecedented levels of success. With albums like Off the Wall, Thriller, and Bad, Jackson became one of the best-selling music artists of all time. His innovative dance moves, such as the moonwalk, and his distinctive voice left an indelible mark on the music industry. Beyond his musical achievements, Michael Jackson revolutionized the music video genre. His videos, including Thriller, Billie Jean, and Beat It, set new standards for production quality and storytelling. Thriller, released in 1983, remains one of the most iconic music videos ever made and helped popularize the medium on a global scale. Jackson's influence extended beyond music. He was a cultural phenomenon whose impact reached into fashion, dance, and even humanitarian efforts. Jackson's philanthropic endeavors were as notable as his musical talents. He supported numerous charities and humanitarian causes throughout his life, including efforts to combat poverty, hunger, and HIV and AIDS. His involvement in charitable work earned him recognition and accolades from organizations around the world. Despite facing personal challenges and controversies, Michael Jackson's legacy endures as one of the greatest entertainers in history, with his contributions to music, dance, and humanitarianism leaving an indelible mark on the world. 14. Jackie Robinson. Jackie Robinson was a trailblazing figure in American sports history, known for breaking the color barrier in Major League Baseball, MLB. Born on January 31, 1919, in Cairo, Georgia, Robinson's athletic prowess was evident from a young age. After excelling in various sports, including football, basketball, track, and baseball, Robinson joined the Kansas City Monarchs in the Negro Leagues in 1945. His talent and resilience caught the attention of Branch Rickey, the president and general manager of the Brooklyn Dodgers, who saw an opportunity to integrate MLB. In 1947, Robinson made history when he became the first African American to play in the modern era of MLB, debuting with the Brooklyn Dodgers. Enduring intense racial prejudice and discrimination, Robinson displayed remarkable courage and skill on the field, earning the respect of fans, teammates, and opponents alike. His exceptional performance paved the way for other African American players to join the major leagues and helped spark a transformation in American society. Beyond his athletic achievements, Jackie Robinson was a symbol of the civil rights movement. He used his platform to advocate for racial equality and social justice, becoming an influential figure both on and off the field. Robinson's impact extended far beyond baseball, inspiring generations of people to challenge injustice and strive for equality. In 1962, he was inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame, cementing his legacy as one of the most important figures in the history of American sports and civil rights. The next person on our list exemplified eloquence and held up a mirror to America. 13. James Baldwin. James Baldwin was a renowned African-American author, playwright, and activist, whose works explored themes of race, sexuality, and identity in American society. Born on August 2, 1924, in Harlem, New York City, Baldwin grew up in the midst of racial segregation and discrimination, experiences that deeply influenced his writing and worldview. Baldwin's literary career began in the 1940s and 1950s, during a time of intense social and political upheaval in the United States. His early novels, such as Go Tell It on the Mountain and Notes of a Native Son, examine the complexities of race, religion, and family in America. Baldwin's poignant prose and unflinching exploration of the African-American experience earned him critical acclaim and established him as a leading voice in American literature. In addition to his novels and essays, James Baldwin was an outspoken advocate for civil rights and social justice. He became a prominent figure in the civil rights movement, participating in marches and protests along leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X. Baldwin's essays, including The Fire Next Time and No Shame in the Street, offered powerful critiques of racism and inequality in America and called for a radical reimagining of society. Throughout his life, Baldwin's writing challenged readers to confront uncomfortable truths about race, sexuality, and power. He was openly gay at a time when homosexuality was widely stigmatized, and his experiences as a gay black man informed much of his work. Baldwin's honesty and courage in addressing taboo subjects made him a controversial figure in his time, but also earned him a devoted following and cemented his legacy as one of the most important writers of the 20th century. James Baldwin's influence extends far beyond the realm of literature. His insights into the human condition and his unwavering commitment to social justice continue to resonate with readers and activists today. Through his writing and activism, Baldwin sought to bridge the divides that separate people and to foster understanding and empathy in a world far too often marked by hatred and division. 12. Paul Robeson. Paul Robeson was a multi-talented African-American actor, singer, athlete, and civil rights activist, whose career spanned several decades and transcended artistic and cultural boundaries. Born on April 9, 1898, in Princeton, New Jersey, Robeson excelled academically and athletically, becoming one of the first African-American students at Rutgers University at the time. He distinguished himself as a football player and graduated a class valedictorian before attending Columbia Law School. Despite his early success in academics and athletics, Robeson ultimately chose to pursue a career in the arts. He gained recognition as a powerful singer, known for his deep, resonant voice and his renditions of spirituals and folk songs. Robeson's performances captivated audiences around the world, and he became one of the most celebrated concert artists of his time. In addition to his musical career, Paul Robeson was a trailblazing actor, known for his powerful performances on stage and screen. He broke barriers by portraying complex, dignified African-American characters in productions such as Othello and The Emperor Jones. Robeson's talent and charisma made him an international star, and he used his platform to advocate for racial equality and social justice. Throughout his life, Robeson was deeply committed to the fight against racism and oppression. He spoke out against lynching, segregation, and colonialism, and he championed the rights for workers and marginalized communities around the world. His outspoken activism often put him at odds with the political establishment, leading to surveillance, harassment, and blacklisting during the McCarthy era. Despite facing persecution and adversity, Paul Robeson remained steadfast in his convictions and continued to use his voice and influence to advocate for justice and equality. His legacy as a pioneering artist, activist, and advocate for human rights continues to inspire people around the world to this day. The next person on our list coined the idea of Blacktown. 11. Dr. Claude Anderson. Dr. Claude Anderson is a prominent author, educator, and advocate for economic empowerment within the African American community. Born on January 24, 1935, in Wewoka, Oklahoma, Anderson has dedicated his life to addressing the economic disparities faced by African Americans and promoting strategies for wealth building and self-reliance. Anderson earned a doctorate in educational administration from Michigan State University and served as a state and regional director in the U.S. Department of Agriculture during the presidency of Jimmy Carter. However, it is his work outside of government that has garnered the most attention and acclaim. One of Dr. Anderson's most influential contributions is his concept of powernomics, outlined in the seminal book Black Labor, White Wealth: The Search for Power and Economic Justice. In this work, Anderson examines the historical and systemic barriers that have hindered economic progress for African Americans and proposes a framework for achieving economic empowerment through group economics, entrepreneurship, and political activism. Through his writings, speeches, and advocacy work, Dr. Anderson has challenged conventional wisdom on issues such as affirmative action, reparations, and economic development. He emphasizes the importance of self-determination and collective action in addressing the economic challenges facing African American communities. In addition to his scholarly work, Dr. Claude Anderson has founded several organizations dedicated to advancing economic empowerment and political awareness among African Americans. His efforts have inspired countless individuals and communities to take control of their economic destinies and work toward a future of prosperity and self-sufficiency. 10. Booker T. Washington. Booker T. Washington was a prominent African American educator, author, and leader in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Born into slavery on April 5, 1856, in Hales Ford, Virginia, Washington rose from humble beginnings to become one of the most influential figures in African American history. After emancipation, Washington pursued an education, attending the Hampton Normal and Agricultural Institute, now Hampton University, in Virginia. He later became an educator himself, serving as the first principal of the Tuskegee Normal and Industrial Institute, now Tuskegee University, in Alabama. Under his leadership, Tuskegee grew into a leading institution for African American education, focusing on practical skills and vocational training. Washington's philosophy of self-help and economic advancement, often referred to as the Atlanta Compromise, emphasized the importance of Black economic development and cooperation with white Americans in the South. In his famous speech in the Atlanta Exposition in 1895, Washington called for mutual respect and cooperation between the races, arguing that economic progress would lead to social and political advancement for African Americans. While Washington's accommodationist approach to race relations drew criticism from some African American leaders, including W.E.B. Du Bois, he was nevertheless respected and admired by many for his tireless efforts to improve the lives of African Americans. He worked tirelessly to raise funds for education and economic development, and his influence extended beyond the confines of Tuskegee to national and international spheres. Booker T. Washington's legacy as a pioneering educator and advocate for African American advancement is enduring. His commitment to practical education, economic empowerment, and racial cooperation laid the groundwork for future generations of civil rights leaders and activists. Despite facing immense challenges and obstacles, Washington remained steadfast in his belief that education and hard work were the keys to achieving equality and justice for African Americans. 9. Barack Obama. Barack Obama made history as the 44th President of the United States, serving 2 terms from 2009 to 2017. Born on August 4, 1961, in Honolulu, Hawaii, Obama's election marked a significant milestone as the first African American to hold the highest office in the nation. Before entering politics, Obama had a diverse background that included community organizing, civil rights law, and academia. He rose to prominence after delivering a keynote address at the 2004 Democratic National Convention, where he emphasized unity and hope across partisan lines. His compelling oratory and message of change resonated with voters, propelling him to the victory in the 2008 presidential election. As president, Barack Obama faced numerous challenges, including the worst economic downturn since the Great Depression, ongoing wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and deep political divisions in Congress. Despite these obstacles, he enacted several landmark policies, including the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform, and Consumer Protection Act, and the repeal of the military's Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy. Obama's presidency was also marked by significant advancements in social justice and civil rights. He signed legislation to combat pay discrimination, expanded hate crime protections, and advocated for comprehensive immigration reform. Additionally, Obama became a vocal supporter for LGBTQ+ rights, publicly endorsing same-sex marriage and appointing the first openly gay cabinet member. Beyond his policy accomplishments, Barack Obama's leadership style and personal demeanor earned him widespread admiration at home and abroad. He emphasized diplomacy and multilateralism in foreign affairs, seeking to repair relationships with allies and engage with adversaries through dialogue and negotiation. Obama's efforts to address global challenges, such as climate change and nuclear proliferation, earned him the Nobel Peace Prize in 2009. Since leaving office, Barack Obama has remained active in public life, advocating for voter engagement, civic participation, and social justice initiatives through his foundation and other platforms. His legacy as the first African American president and his enduring impact on American politics and society continue to inspire future generations. Our next person, in the words of Malcolm X, decided to swing up on some freedom. 8. Muhammad Ali. Muhammad Ali, born Cassius Marcellus Clay Jr. on January 17, 1942, in Louisville, Kentucky, was one of the most celebrated and influential athletes of the 20th century. Renowned for his unparalleled boxing skills, charismatic personality, and outspoken advocacy for civil rights and social justice, Ali transcended the sport of boxing to become a global icon. Ali gained prominence as an amateur boxer, winning a gold medal in the light heavyweight division in the 1960 Summer Olympics in Rome. He turned professional shortly after and quickly rose through the ranks of the boxing world. Known for his lightning-fast footwork, powerful punches, and unorthodox fighting style, Ali became the undisputed heavyweight champion of the world, winning the title 3 times in his career. Outside the ring, Ali was a passionate advocate for civil rights and racial equality. He famously refused to be drafted to the U.S. military during the Vietnam War, citing his religious beliefs and opposition to the war. The decision resulted in him being stripped of his boxing titles and banned from the sport for 3 years. Despite facing immense personal and professional challenges, Ali remained steadfast in his convictions and eventually had his conviction overturned by the Supreme Court. Ali's activism extended beyond racial issues to encompass broader social justice causes. He spoke out against poverty, inequality, and discrimination, using his platform as a prominent athlete to amplify marginalized voices. His willingness to sacrifice his career for his beliefs and his unwavering commitment to principle made him a hero to millions around the world. In addition to his athletic and humanitarian achievements, Ali was known for his larger-than-life personality and memorable quotes. His wit, charm, and charisma made him a beloved figure both inside and outside the boxing ring. Muhammad Ali passed away on June 3, 2016, but his legacy as a sporting legend, cultural icon, and champion for social change continues to inspire people of all backgrounds to this day. 7. Marcus Garvey. Marcus Garvey was a Jamaican-born political leader, journalist, and entrepreneur who became a prominent figure in the early 20th century Pan-Africanism movement. Born on August 17, 1887, in St. Ann's Bay, Jamaica, Garvey emerged as a dynamic and charismatic leader, advocating for the empowerment and unity of people of African descent worldwide. Garvey's vision was rooted in the belief that people of African ancestry, who had been historically oppressed and marginalized, needed to assert their own political, economic, and cultural sovereignty. In 1914, he founded the Universal Negro Improvement Association, UNIA, which aimed to unite African diaspora communities and promote Black self-reliance and self-determination. One of Garvey's most notable achievements was the establishment of the Black Star Line, a shipping company designed to facilitate trade and transportation among African diaspora communities. The Black Star Line symbolized Garvey's commitment to economic empowerment and Pan-African cooperation, although it faced financial difficulties and ultimately failed. Garvey's message of Black pride, self-respect, and self-reliance resonated with millions of people around the world, particularly in the Caribbean, the United States, and Africa. He used his platform as a speaker and journalist to promote his ideas, reaching audiences through newspapers, lectures, and mass rallies. Despite his significant influence and popularity, Marcus Garvey also faced opposition and persecution from government authorities, particularly in the United States. In 1923, he was convicted of mail fraud related to the sale of stock in the Black Star Line and was subsequently deported to Jamaica. However, Garvey's ideas continued to inspire generations of activists and leaders in the struggle for civil rights and Black liberation. Marcus Garvey's legacy as a champion of Pan-Africanism and Black nationalism endures to this day. His emphasis on self-empowerment, racial pride, and global solidarity laid the foundation for later movements for Black liberation and continues to inspire people of African descent around the world. More than halfway through our list. If you're still here, leave a power fist emoji in the comments. 6. Huey Newton. Huey P. Newton was a pivotal figure in the African American civil rights movement as one of the co-founders of the Black Panther Party, BPP. Born on February 17, 1942, in Monroe, Louisiana, Newton grew up in Oakland, California, where he experienced firsthand the systemic racism and police brutality that plagued African American communities. In 1966, Newton and Bobby Seale co-founded the Black Panther Party for self-defense in response to police violence and the lack of social and economic opportunities for African Americans. The BPP advocated for armed self-defense, community empowerment, and revolutionary change, organizing community patrols to monitor police activity and providing free breakfast programs, health clinics, and educational services to underserved communities. Under Newton's leadership, the Black Panther Party became a powerful force for social change and a symbol of resistance against racial oppression. Newton's philosophy of revolutionary intercommunalism emphasized solidarity among oppressed peoples worldwide and called for the dismantling of all forms of exploitation and oppression. However, Newton's activism also made him a target of government surveillance and repression. He was arrested multiple times on various charges, including allegations of murder and assault, leading to prolonged legal battles and controversy surrounding his leadership of the BPP. Despite the challenges and controversies he faced, Huey P. Newton remained committed to the struggle for racial and social justice. After leaving the Black Panther Party in the late 1970s, he continued his activism and advocacy work, focusing on issues such as prison reform, drug rehabilitation, and community organizing. Newton's legacy as a revolutionary thinker and activist continues to inspire generations of people around the world. His contributions to the African American civil rights movement and his unwavering commitment to the principles of self-defense, community empowerment, and social justice have left an indelible mark on American history and the fight for equality and liberation. This next person is the reason we have Black History Month. 5. Carter G. Woodson. Carter G. Woodson was a pioneering African American historian, author, and educator who played a pivotal role in promoting the study and celebration of African American history and culture. Born on December 19, 1875, in New Canton, Virginia, Woodson grew up in a family of former slaves and faced numerous obstacles in obtaining an education. Despite facing discrimination and limited opportunities, Woodson persevered and earned a Bachelor of Literature degree from Berea College in Kentucky. He later obtained a Bachelor of Arts degree from the University of Chicago and a Master's of History degree from the same institution. Woodson went on to become the second African American to earn a PhD in history from Harvard University in 1912. In 1915, Carter G. Woodson and Jesse E. Moreland co-founded the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History, now the Association for the Study of African American Life and History, to promote research and scholarship on the history and achievements of African Americans. Woodson believed that the systematic study of Black history was essential for combating racial prejudice and fostering pride and self-respect among African Americans. Woodson's most influential work is his creation of Negro History Week, which later evolved into Black History Month. In 1926, he launched Negro History Week to coincide with the birthdays of Frederick Douglass and Abraham Lincoln, two figures who played significant roles in African American history. The annual observance aimed to highlight the contributions of African Americans to the nation's history and culture, and to promote awareness and understanding of Black history among all Americans. Throughout his career, Carter G. Woodson authored numerous books and articles on African American history, including The Miseducation of the Negro and The Negro in Our History. He was a passionate advocate for the inclusion of Black history in school curricula and worked tirelessly to ensure that African American contributions were recognized and celebrated. Carter G. Woodson's dedication to the study and preservation of African American history laid the foundation for the academic discipline of African American studies and inspired generations of scholars and activists. His commitment to celebrating Black achievement and challenging racial stereotypes continues to resonate today, making him a central figure in the ongoing struggle for racial equality and social justice. The next person on our list took a whole sport global and changed sneaker culture forever. 4. Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan is widely regarded as one of the greatest basketball players of all time and a global icon in sports and popular culture. Born on February 17, 1963, in Brooklyn, New York, Jordan's athletic prowess and competitive drive were evident from a young age. After starring at the University of North Carolina, where he won a national championship in 1982, Jordan entered the NBA draft and was selected by the Chicago Bulls with the third overall pick in 1984. Over the course of his illustrious career, Jordan would go on to redefine the game of basketball and elevate it to new heights of popularity and success. During his time with the Chicago Bulls, Jordan led the team to 6 NBA championships, winning the NBA Finals MVP award each time. His unparalleled scoring ability, athleticism, and clutch performances earned him numerous accolades, including 5 regular season MVP awards and 10 scoring titles. Jordan's impact extended beyond statistics. His charisma, leadership, and competitive spirit made him a beloved figure around the world. Off the court, Michael Jordan became a global brand and cultural icon. His partnership with Nike led to the creation of the Air Jordan sneaker line, which revolutionized the athletic footwear industry and remains one of the most iconic and successful sneaker brands to this day. Jordan's influence transcended sports as he became a symbol of excellence, determination, and success in all endeavors. In addition to his basketball career, Jordan has found success as a businessman and team owner. He is the majority owner of the Charlotte Hornets, an NBA franchise based in North Carolina. Jordan's impact on the game of basketball and popular culture is immeasurable, and his legacy as a player, entrepreneur, and global ambassador continues to inspire millions of people around the world. These last 3 figures are not in any particular order, but no one has impacted Black people and the world at large more than them. 3. Malcolm X. Malcolm X, born Malcolm Little on May 19, 1925, in Omaha, Nebraska, was a prominent African-American leader, activist, and advocate for civil rights and Black liberation. His journey from a troubled youth to becoming one of the most influential figures in the struggle for racial equality is a testament to his resilience, intellect, and unwavering commitment to justice. Raised in a family deeply affected by racism and violence, Malcolm experienced firsthand the injustices and discrimination faced by African Americans in the United States. After a tumultuous youth, marked by encounters with the criminal justice system, Malcolm found direction and purpose through the teachings of the Nation of Islam, NOI, a black nationalist and religious organization. Under the guidance of NOI leader Elijah Muhammad, Malcolm X emerged as a powerful orator and spokesperson for the organization, advocating for black pride, self-determination, and self-defense. His impassioned speeches and uncompromising stance against white supremacy resonated with many African Americans who were disillusioned with the nonviolent approach of the civil rights movement. Malcolm's views evolved over time, particularly after his pilgrimage to Mecca in 1964, where he experienced a transformative spiritual awakening and embraced a more inclusive vision of Islam and racial unity. He broke ties with the Nation of Islam and founded the Organization of Afro-American Unity, OAAU, which sought to address social, economic, and political issues affecting African Americans. Tragically, Malcolm X was assassinated on February 21, 1965, at the age of 39. His untimely death robbed the world of a visionary leader and left a void in the struggle for racial justice. However, Malcolm's legacy as a fearless advocate for black empowerment and liberation lives on, inspiring generations of activists and leaders to challenge injustice and fight for equality. His autobiography, co-written with Alex Haley, remains a seminal work that continues to educate and inspire readers worldwide. Malcolm X's impact on the civil rights movement and his enduring influence on the quest for racial justice make him an icon for courage, conviction, and resistance. 2. Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass was an eminent African-American abolitionist, orator, writer, and statesman who played a pivotal role in the fight against slavery and the struggle for civil rights in the United States. Born into slavery around 1818 in Talbot County, Maryland, Douglass endured the hardships and brutality of bondage before escaping to freedom at the age of 20. Douglass's escape to the North marked the beginning of his remarkable journey as a leading figure in the abolitionist movement. He became known for his powerful oratory skills and compelling narratives about his experiences as a slave, captivating audiences with his eloquence and moral clarity. In 1845, Douglass published his first autobiography, Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, an American Slave, which became a bestseller and brought widespread attention to the horrors of slavery. His eloquent writings and speeches helped galvanize support for the abolitionist cause and made him one of the most influential voices of his time. Throughout his life, Frederick Douglass remained steadfast in his commitment to ending slavery and advancing the cause for racial equality. He worked closely with other abolitionist leaders, including William Lloyd Garrison and John Brown, and became a prominent advocate for women's rights as well. After the Civil War and the abolition of slavery, Douglass continued to fight for civil rights and social justice. He held several government positions, including serving as a U.S. minister to Haiti and as a presidential advisor to several presidents. He also continued to write and speak out against racial discrimination and injustice until his death on February 20, 1895. Frederick Douglass's legacy as a champion of freedom, equality, and justice continues to inspire people around the world. His courageous activism, eloquent speeches, and indomitable spirit helped pave the way for the abolition of slavery and laid the groundwork for the civil rights movement of the 20th century. Douglass's contributions to American history and his enduring commitment to the ideals of liberty and equality make him a towering figure in the annals of human rights and social progress. 1. Martin Luther King Jr. Martin Luther King Jr. was a pivotal figure in the American civil rights movement, known for his nonviolent activism and powerful speeches, advocating for racial equality, justice, and peace. Born on January 15, 1929, in Atlanta, Georgia, King was deeply influenced by his upbringing in a family of pastors and his exposure to the teachings of nonviolent resistance. King rose to national prominence in the 1950s and 1960s as a leader in the struggle against racial segregation and discrimination. He played a central role in organizing and leading key events such as the Montgomery bus boycott in 1955, which protested segregation on public buses, and the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom in 1963, where he delivered his iconic I Have a Dream speech. King's commitment to nonviolent protest and civil disobedience was inspired by his Christian faith and the teachings of Mahatma Gandhi. He believed that love and compassion were powerful forces for social change, and that nonviolent resistance could overcome even the most entrenched systems of oppression. Throughout his life, Martin Luther King Jr. faced numerous challenges and obstacles, including arrests, harassment, and threats to his safety. However, he remained steadfast in his pursuit of justice and equality. advocating for peaceful resistance even in the face of violence and hostility. King's tireless efforts to advance civil rights and social justice earned him widespread acclaim and recognition, including the Nobel Peace Prize in 1964. However, his work was far from complete, as he continued to speak out against racism, poverty, and militarism until his untimely assassination on April 4, 1968, in Memphis, Tennessee. Martin Luther King Jr.'s legacy continues to resonate today, inspiring generations of people around the world to work toward a more just and equitable society. His moral leadership, courage, and unwavering commitment to the principles of equality and nonviolence serve as a beacon of hope and inspiration for those fighting for civil rights and social justice everywhere.